Hey everyone, thank you all for joining us today. My name is Josh Capel. I'm one of the founding partners of Vicente Sederberg, and I'm here, with Cassia Furman, our Vicente Sederberg partner in the California office, Charlie Alvacetti, the VS partner that runs our corporate department, Brandon Kurtzman, in our Massachusetts office, and then our great friends at Burns Levinson as well, Scott Wilskull and Frank Siegel. And it's great to see so many of you on this stream. I appreciate your time, and it's also finally made me clean up a little bit. I know we've all been cooped up in our houses, and so it's good to be out and in a virtual sort of way. But seriously though, it's like what trying times we're living in. Never did I expect that we would face such an unprecedented health emergency. That's really filling our hospitals, it's shutting down our economies, and it's changing everyday life. And it's like what the world's going to look like when this is all over. Like we really just don't know. But on one hand, I also never would have guessed that 13 years ago, when I started working on cannabis reform, that cannabis businesses would be deemed an essential business and allowed to stay open among hospitals, pharmacies, and grocery stores. However, it's like our fight still continues, and as we'll talk about a little bit, we still have issues with the SBA, denying licensed cannabis businesses critical loans because we're still illegal under federal law. And so, as the world's changing, I just want to let you all know, that we're dedicated, here at Vicente Sederberg and Burns Levinson, we're dedicated to helping you not only navigate, our complex cannabis industry, but to sort of navigate this rapidly changing world. And our team, as we'll sort of hear about today, it's like our team of cannabis policy wonks really have been diligently tracking regulatory changes in cities and states across the U.S. And we've also been, not only have we been tracking these changes, but we've been working, to make sure cannabis stores are kept open and that the regulations are modified so that patients can still access their medicine safely. And, our team at, corporate team, we've also been analyzing the latest federal state relief programs, to help, position our clients to best take advantage of those. And our corporate team has been working with Burns Levinson, on with some turnarounds and some bankruptcies acts, and some cannabis bankruptcy actions, that they'll be talking about later. So here's a quick outline of the webinar. First, I'm probably going to ramble a little bit longer about the federal response and provide an overview of some different state regulations. Then we're going to turn it over to Charlie, Brandon, and Cassia to dive into a few different states. And then finally, our friends Scott and Frank at Burns are going to highlight some initial takeaways that every cannabis business should be considering in light of the current economic uncertainty. Afterwards, we will be taking questions. So please, in the chat, we'll be answering questions afterwards. And so in the chat right now, it really makes sense. And as you have questions, feel free just to put them in the chat. We'll be selecting a couple. The ones we have time for, we'll answer. The ones that we don't, we'll respond and try and get back to everybody with answers about them. And one more sort of like point of clarification. It's like most of this webinar is going to be about state licensed cannabis businesses. We will have future webinars, one more focused on hemp, another focused on SBA loans, another one focused on employment. And so stay tuned, to the to our series of webinars that we're putting together here. Good news though for a lot of our clients and for a lot of you listening, it seems that there have been a high number of sales of cannabis sales, and it's hard to decipher if those sales are based off of people just hoarding, or if cannabis is actually recession proof here. And hold on 1 second. Perfect, there we go. And so the federal response to date has really been about overall economic relief and really addressing the impact of this pandemic. And there's two sort of big federal acts that every business needs to know about. One is the CARES Act, and this is actually probably being voted on right now in the House, or at least being debated. And and what the CARES Act does is it provides really $2 trillion of stimulus to our economy with a lot of benefits, with a lot of benefits to small businesses. And a couple highlights, but again, this will be part of another webinar. There's a payroll protection program that provides government loans to cover small businesses 2.5 months of their overhead. And right now it appears, well, we know that hemp businesses qualify for this. It appears that cannabis businesses will likely not qualify, but we're still trying to determine if sort of like the broad aspect of this program trumps the SBA's prohibition on loaning to illegal businesses. In short, it's like our team, we've been fighting for this, but it's not looking the best. But at the end of the day, with the payroll protection program, they're going to be administered through your local bank. So find out if your local bank's an SBA lender, if they're participating. Another couple key pieces about the CARES Act is there's some deferred payroll taxes for businesses until where you can defer your payroll tax until 2021 or 2022. There's also increased unemployment benefits if you have to lay individuals off. They should have about almost double the unemployment benefits. There's checks coming out to everyone who, to individuals who make less than $90,000. AGI started, boost the economy here. And really, there's like a whole host of other tax benefits related to the CARES Act. Again, it hasn't been passed yet. It'll be a subject of another webinar. But there's a lot of benefits here that really all businesses should look into. The second big federal response has been the Family First Coronavirus Response Act. This and without diving into the details, creates different amounts of paid sick leave and emergency sick leave. A couple key points is that you likely, if you do qualify under the FMLA, you will likely need to post notice to your employees or email your employees about this. And it appears, but we're still looking that tax credits will be deductible for cannabis businesses because they're credits on a payroll tax. Again, though, check with your tax counsel, on the specifics there. And the Family First Coronavirus Response Act goes into effect April 1st. But really, that's those are two high-level federal acts. It's really when it comes to cannabis and what's happening and how the regulations are changing, a lot of it's really a state and local responses. And so what we've seen, is pretty much across the board, we've seen cannabis being deemed an essential business and being allowed to stay open. We've seen, different regulatory agencies have stopped meeting in person and are, working remotely. At the state level, we haven't seen it impact regulatory approval times. We have seen local governments, though, tell our clients who are looking to change ownership or acquire a license that it might be months before they have a hearing, or they actually, get to that issue. So, there is some, local slowbacks that are happening. And then, what we've also seen, from a big picture perspective is, we've seen a lot of, state regulators adjust their regulations to allow for curbside pickup. We've seen different states move forward on delivery and online ordering, and there's also been some requests for tax relief that we'll dive into more once we dive into the different states. Big picture though, it's like when for the cannabis businesses that are open, look at not just both a state order, the changing regulations, but also what about your local orders? And we've seen in Colorado, for example, a conflict between, what the state has permitted and what different cities have permitted. And we've seen the same in California. So it's really important to sort of understand both of those, both regulatory bodies and what they're doing with cannabis. Best practices, just big picture, it's like following these physical distancing, requirements, it's following all of the public health guidelines, setting aside times for vulnerable patients to shop, and encouraging patients to obtain medical cards. In some states, in some jurisdictions, there's a lot more access, to medical cannabis than adult retail stores. And so, along those lines, we've also seen some states now permit telemedicine in obtaining some of these medical cannabis cards. And so, big picture, we're seeing a lot of action at the federal level in terms of different stimulus and aid packages, and hopefully some of those will be available for cannabis businesses. They're definitely going to be available for lawful hemp businesses. There's a lot of employment concerns as we go through these uncertain times. And then we've seen a lot of regulatory changes happening as the regulators are adapting, and trying to change the regulations in light of these public health concerns. And so, sort of like setting the stage, and now, want to turn things over, to looking, to more of a deeper dive into, some of the major cannabis markets, so you can sort of understand what's happening at the regulatory level, and really, see what both the new changes are of how you have to comply, and also new opportunities as well. And so with that, remember, as questions come up, please submit your questions on the chat, and we will bring those up at that. Now moving over to Cassia Furman, who's our partner in our California office.
Thanks, Josh.
And there she is. Perfect.
Here I am, reporting to you live from my home. Thanks everyone for spending a little time with us today. It's been an interesting couple of weeks with a lot of anxiety and uncertainty for operators around the country. And I'm here to talk a little bit about what's going on in California, which has also been a fluid situation. California being a leader for both the cannabis commercial industry as well as policy on a national level. In California, we have an integrated adult use and medical supply chain already. And so I think that made the determination easier at the state level for cannabis to be declared an essential business without some focus on medical only licenses at the local jurisdictions, but largely adult use sales continuing, as well as the supply chain, which is already integrated, being able to provide products for both streams at retail. We're seeing on today, March 27th, retailers relying on a combination of delivery, curbside, and in-store sales, with social distancing and sanitary precautions for workers being highlighted. Much of the supply chain is still flowing, although we have been hearing from companies down the chain, particularly manufacturing more than cultivation, which is of course critical to remain on site and working, that some companies have voluntarily suspended, partially or full aspects of their manufacturing operations to kind of do their part for the economy and for the public health crisis as well. Thus far, the reports have been that sales are good, but obviously there's a lot of concern about the longevity of the situation since we are in a statewide stay-at-home policy. How we got here to March 27th, the past 2 weeks have been incredibly fluid. In California, public health matters are largely delegated to the county health departments. It's a very strong state at the county level, and probably in part because it is so large. On March 12th, Governor Newsom issued his first series of executive orders to guide the state response to the COVID-19 crisis, delegating resources to those county public health departments to make critical determinations. They also rolled out resources for employees and workers, which are available on the state website, also linked to the Vicente Sederberg website. And CDTFA, which is the tax collection agency in California, has been setting up a platform that companies can apply for both tax extensions and relief from interest and penalties. Those are available to cannabis businesses the way they are to any other businesses. In California, we treat cannabis businesses on equal footing, more or less, with other businesses. So we've been encouraging clients to take advantage of those programs. So from there, on March 16th, a few days later, the Bureau of Cannabis Control, which is our regulatory body in cannabis for at least the retailers, distribution phases, and with some partial governance over manufacturing and cultivation as well, issued emergency rules that allowed for this curbside pickup procedures. The state does have a ban on drive-through services, so there was confusion amongst the retailers prior to that order about curbside. The Bureau when they evoke the emergency rules, it's actually in a larger segment of the regulations. So it's possible that under that disaster section, there could be other exemptions from the rules that companies may consider as well moving forward. I'll mention that a little bit at the end, but it's an interesting and of course unprecedented time period for companies trying to stay open and respond to these constantly changing conditions. Also on March 16th, the Bay Area counties issued their first stay-at-home orders in response to the governor's direction to the counties to provide, public health response. If rather famously at this point, San Francisco at first declared cannabis businesses to be non-essential, which led to the industry contacting local and state officials, arguing for access for medical patients in particular, as well as cultivation, which is critical to keep online. Mayor London Breed from San Francisco later reversed that position in a tweet, which shows just how dynamic this process has been and how local government officials have been trying to stay on top of things and move these issues forward in such a demanding environment. On March 19th, and here in Los Angeles, Mayor Garcetti issued a safer at home order effective until April 19th and said that, in order to stay open, stores have to have a medical license, but sales are not limited to medical. So that's been an interesting dynamic around the state where you have this interplay between medical and adult use. Literally an hour or so after Garcetti issued the order for LA County, as everyone was scrambling, Governor Newsom then ordered a statewide stay-at-home order that's effective until further notice. That order originally referred to federal programming that, of course, doesn't mention cannabis as a business whatsoever, so there were some concerns about that interplay, but later CDPH at the state level confirmed that cannabis is an essential business. And so we've been operating largely under that context since the March 19th date. So it's been about 8 days so far. And only yesterday, the city of Berkeley issued a pronouncement that now they're going to prohibit curbside at the local level due to some public health concerns there. There's some movement to reverse that decision, but also some concern that it could spread to other portions of the state. And it just illustrates that this is a dynamic situation and public officials are under siege and have some very challenging public health decisions to make about how to protect the greater good here. And, we as a cannabis industry can do a lot to band together and speak with a unified voice to demand access for patients, but also to safeguard the health and safety of our employees. Just hearing from folks in the field in terms of challenges and tips for operators. Employee morale and health is the central issue of the day. These folks working in the shops in particular, but also throughout the supply chain are frontline essential service providers, same as folks working in grocery stores, etc. This is not a situation that any of them anticipated being in up until now. And that's a stressful situation for both employers and the employees, obviously. So to employers, consider employment law issues as you're, dealing with the employee concerns. Monitor there's a lot of resources out there, both OSHA and at the state level, for guidance for employers related to COVID-19. Follow those directives. We've been hearing a lot of reports about payments to vendors just not happening. And, obviously, in order for the supply chain to keep going, it's important for, people to continue to get paid. So I think that's, sort of an ongoing concern moving forward. And again, mentioning the disaster relief requests and the Bureau regulations, just considering if there are aspects of your business that may be, difficult for you to effectuate during this time period. Are there other things that you can submit a request to the Bureau and ask for a waiver, or just let them know that it's going to be impossible for you to do? For example, there's some OSHA training that people have been able to get waived, which is, an example. I think as we move forward, depending on how long this lasts, there may be some other issues that come up. File with CDTFA for the tax extension, and make sure that you understand not only just what's coming down from Governor Newsom's order and those resources, but also what's happening at your local level. And if there are things that you don't like or are problematic with your local orders, understand that it's a dynamic situation and people are doing the best they can. Be communicative, and things have been changing back and forth so quickly that there's every possibility that a unified, or at least a partially unified voice from the industry could be helpful in changing things back to a better policy. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Charlie and Colorado update. Thanks all.
Thanks, Cassia. So I'll give the update here on Colorado. I'll just switch the slide to Colorado. So, much like California, a lot of we're in an extremely fluid situation. So a lot of the same sort of pointers and caveats apply, which is that we've gotten sort of differing directives and it's been an evolving process. So what I'll talk through is, we've gotten a series of executive orders from the governor. And we've also seen localities issue bulletins that are relevant to the industry. In particular, we'll talk about Denver. Denver has issued a stay-at-home order, which is pretty relevant for cannabis businesses, because a great deal of the not just dispensaries, but grow operations and manufacturing facilities in Colorado are located in Denver. Though there's also been actions from other localities that we can talk about. So, here's kind of the chronological update of what's happened. We first got a series of emergency rules issued by the Marijuana Enforcement Division, the MED, sort of the primary regulator for cannabis businesses here in Colorado, which addressed concerns specific to this new environment. So in particular, they reiterated, one, these businesses are expected to follow public health orders. Two, they suspended the requirements to apply for a modification of premises and receive approval if the changes are made to effectuate social distancing measures, which is important because it previously took a great deal of time to get a modification of premises approved. So that's very helpful. The requirements to submit fingerprints for owner licenses are temporarily suspended. We can talk about that in a second, how we expect this to impact corporate transactions and changes of ownership. And then the big change in terms of what's customer facing is that it permitted online and phone ordering as well as curbside pickup. Now, so under the previous rules, you were not allowed to take sales online. Now, under the new system, you can take a sale online. You can't ship it to the customer. You can't deliver it to the customer. Delivery is still requires separate licensure. They have issued one delivery license in Colorado and Boulder on the medical side, but there have been no changes as a result of the coronavirus that impact delivery. However, you can now take an order on the phone, take an order online. Obviously, the payment processing issues are still in effect, but you could now take payment through an online portal, and the customer can just come and pick up the product. Now, the complexity comes here is that there were emergency rules issued effectively immediately after a new order from the governor came out. The rules were written sort of in advance of the executive order from the government. So the interplay between the executive orders from the government and the Marijuana Enforcement Division rule updates have sort of shaken out over time. And, so I'll just give you the sort of the key takeaway point, which is that the governor's update clarified that retail, so adult use, can only be curbside, statewide, subject to local jurisdictions. So a medical store can remain open, people can go into the licensed premises. However, an adult use store can only do curbside. And that created a lot of question about sort of what does curbside mean, particularly for stores that face busy streets and don't necessarily have a parking lot or any kind of private area they could use for pickups outside of the store. And then to complicate matters further, Denver on March 23rd came out with a stay-at-home order that initially shut down adult use medical stores. So they said medical is essential, it can remain open, but adult use has to get shut down. There was and that also included liquor stores. So it's relevant for these purposes because there was immediately a run on liquor stores and adult use dispensaries. I was looking out the window and I could see the line sort of stretch down the block for the dispensary next to me. Then via tweet at the end of the day, Denver walked it back, and I'll just read this to you. The order has been updated with the following changes. Liquor stores with extreme physical distancing in place will be exempt. All marijuana stores with extreme physical distancing in place are also exempt. So as it stands now, adult use stores are still open in Denver, but they can only do curbside pickup. Then we subsequently got update from the regulators that said, a little bit more detail about what curbside is. And they basically said you could do what amounts to a takeout window. So, you can go to the store with extreme physical distancing in place and, place your order at the front. They'll get it for you, give it to you, and then you leave. So it's like a takeout window. So it remains to see how that impacts sales, because prior to this Denver order, everyone was reporting record sales. One other important update in Colorado is that telemedicine has now been allowed. So we're encouraging businesses to let their clientele know that, if adult use were to be shut down, if Denver were to reverse course again, one option is you can go and through telemedicine attain a medical marijuana card to get your medicine. So that's something that is important for everyone to realize. And, I'll just reiterate what Cassie said again, is it's an extremely fluid situation. We don't know what's going to happen next. And there are changes at both the state level and at the local level that we continue to monitor. And with that, the updates on Florida, there's really not a ton to say on Florida. It's a little bit simpler. So, one, as with other states, we've been seeing sales having been reported is significantly above average statewide. Two, we have not gotten Department of Health guidance. The DOH in Florida is the regulator for medical marijuana. They have not provided guidance to licensees. So it sort of is business as usual with the, sort of with the general guidance provided to the business as a whole. There's nothing specific to marijuana. We do have an emergency order 20-01 from Broward County, which is one of the 3 counties that make up the Miami area, which ordered all non-essential retail and commercial businesses to close, except to perform minimum basic operations. And it specified that medical marijuana facilities are deemed essential and therefore not subject to the order, and therefore may remain open with proper social distancing protocols in place. So that's the update on Florida. Not a ton to say there, but the big update is in Massachusetts is as of March 24th, and initially the order stays in effect until April 7th. Medical marijuana dispensaries are designated as essential businesses allowed to remain open. Adult use retail operations are forced to close.
Hey guys, is this working?
Okay, I'm gonna turn it over to Brandon.
All right, Brandon's back.
Sorry about that, guys. I think that what Charlie was saying, the governor came out with an executive order and indicated that all non-essential businesses had to close. And as that applied to the cannabis industry, medical treatment centers and co-located marijuana establishments that have adult use and medical were deemed essential. At least the medical parts of those were. And then the Cannabis Control Commission, in basically acting in conjunction with the governor's executive order, came out with a cease and desist order, which said essentially the same thing, that medical operations could continue, but adult use operations had to stop. And so sort of breaking those down into what we're seeing now in terms of, medical and adult use. For medical, the commission has indicated or is trying to implement and encourage existing medical operators to move forward faster with medical delivery. And they've asked the folks that have these licenses to submit SOPs in terms of, how they're going to do their deliveries. Similar to Colorado, there's also teleconsulting that is available in order for new patients to get a card. And, we're going to post a list of the different registered practitioners that do teleconferencing on the website, so people can check that out and encourage new patients to get their medical cards, so that they can go to the medical shops, which are open for all business. You can still go in. They are encouraging them to practice, best practices and social distancing measures. I think that and also interestingly enough, medical providers or the MTCs, the medical treatment centers that have cultivation and manufacturing, are also been permitted to make hand sanitizer. So a lot of the MDCs out there are now doing that, which is interesting. I think that from the overall licensing standpoint, there's been a lot of new developments that are impacting how folks are getting through the application process. I think most importantly, the commission is still working on applications. They are working from home, but they said that they're moving forward with review of all applications, and they are planning on having their scheduled monthly meeting on the 9th. They're going to do it, via video conference. We are seeing clients ask, and we are submitting a variety of waivers to the commission for things that are now proving to be more difficult based on the stay-at-home or the executive order from the governor. So things like fingerprinting requirements and extensions on license renewal payments are some of the waiver topics that we've been submitting to the commission and waiting to get responses on. They have indicated that the commission is going to continue to do inspections, but they are trying to figure out what the best way is to do that in a safe manner, and so we're going to get more information on that soon, and then we're hoping that the inspections will continue shortly, so that folks can continue to move through the application process. And I really think that the last thing that we're kind of seeing is a collective push from folks in the industry to the commission and to the governor's office to allow for adult use sales for a variety of reasons. And I think that as the executive order stays in place, there's going to be a continued push to get some changes on those fronts. But if anybody has any questions about the application process in Massachusetts, or what we're seeing in specific circumstances, definitely reach out to myself or anybody in the Massachusetts office, and we'd love to chat with you about it. And with that, I think I'll turn it back over to Charlie, because
thanks, Brandon. This is to any Massachusetts operators on the call. And as Brandon said, the governor has shut down recreational. Vicente and Burns are working with their clients, and we're actually taking the lead on trying to rally the industry in Massachusetts to get the governor to reconsider. One of his biggest reasons for shutting down recreational was the alleged excuse that it was bringing traffic in from other states, and he wanted to cut that down. the obvious answer and fix to that is just you have to be a Massachusetts resident. So we are mobilizing the industry to try to get the government to reconsider this. Also, treating package stores differently from retail recreational certainly isn't justified. But there are other issues with veterans, people who don't have medical cards, who don't want to get medical cards and be in the system. So there is a big push for this, but it's important if people are doing business in Massachusetts to reach out to Vicente, reach out to Burns and Levinson, or your own attorneys, state representatives. And we really are trying to mobilize everybody because this is such an important issue and the ramifications are significant. So I just wanted to pass that along.
Yeah, thanks, Frank. And so I'm going to turn it over, back to Frank and Scott Moskal from Burns Levinson, talk about economic uncertainty.
Well, I guess the two best looking guys don't have pictures up on this one. We're going to be faithless, but we certainly appreciate everyone dialing in today. Scott and I, besides spending most of our time in cannabis, we do a lot of restructurings and have been through a number of recessions, turnarounds, serious economic scenarios like we're facing today. And our goal is just to give you an overview of what you should be thinking about and how to deal with this situation. We don't have, as people on, prior speakers have said, we're not going to have the benefits of certain federal stimulus packages. That's going to put extra strain on our businesses. There might be some state relief, and people should be looking at the state level to see what relief there can be. Massachusetts is going to be particularly hard hit by this, as Brandon and I were talking about. If we don't get recreational turned around, we could be looking at losing 4,000 jobs, significant revenue and tax income. So we wanted to just highlight some of the things to be focused on, and I'm going to turn it back to Scott to kick that off.
Hey, everybody, and thank you, Frank. Unfortunately, it's, as Frank just said, the two best-looking guys are not on your video phone, or maybe it's a good thing. But we want to just take a few quick moments to talk about some 5 quick takeaways that folks should start thinking about during this unfortunate time. And the sad reality is that workouts and turnarounds and restructurings and insolvency proceedings happen in every industry, and this is a nascent industry, and it's going to happen, and certainly is already happening here. And so we just want to give folks 5 quick takeaways to think about. And additionally, I think later on in the series that we're doing with Vicente, we'll talk more about, or go more into depth about things that impact cannabis, hemp, CBD players, and some other strategies they can employ. But I think in terms of takeaway number 1, it's the show must go on. And in that, folks cannot put their heads in the sand right now. As Charlie mentioned, and as everyone has mentioned, the various regulators are still working. Medical marijuana facilities, and in some states, recreational dispensaries are still open. And now's the time to really figure out what you can do to address any uncertainties in this economic environment. And with that, I think the second takeaway is that the industry as itself needs to address systemic business concerns or issues at this time. Just like we would tell any potential client or company during a restructuring period, the time is now to figure out how much cash do you have on hand. The time is now to do realistic cash projections, not just for the next 30 days or next 90 days, but certainly go out 180 days. and figure out where your expenses lie and what realistically you can expect in terms of cash. So, as we've been talking about in Massachusetts, with the recreational dispensaries, at least for now, seemingly closed, for co-located dispensaries, they have to figure out, well, what will be our realistic decline in cash projections. I think what's also important for folks to understand is there are certain things or certain items that if the company does not pay could become personal liability to the principals. And examples like this are employee wages, incurred but unpaid PTO, trust fund taxes, so through the payroll system, and in some states, sales tax is actually personal liability to the owners and the principals. So to that extent, folks should really drill down on what has or has not been paid. Certainly also, unfortunately, income tax, well, not necessarily personal liability, can cripple the entity as well. And I think that brings us to...
Just nothing to add. I think what we find in these difficult times, and when we've encountered severe economic depression in the past and restructurings, retoolings, one of the most important things for companies to keep in mind is you have to plan and move fast. You can't delay inevitable decisions, as difficult as they are. And one of them, unfortunately, is generally one of your biggest expenses is your workforce. So as Scott said, you're running your 13-week cash flows. You should be going out 30, 60, 90 days, trying to do the best you can to forecast cash flow, cash reserves. But as you realize that you have to make cuts, and many will and are, the best thing to do is to rip that Band-Aid off and do it sooner rather than later before you find that you're falling into the hole. Unfortunately, with the stimulus package that is going to be available to non-cannabis companies, not being available to cannabis, that is unfortunately going to make your decision a little easier, because you're not going to be able to take advantage of these forgivable loans that would otherwise keep your employee staff in place. So, important thing, as I said, is making the decision and implementing it sooner rather than later.
Well, although one caveat with the SBA loans, the SBA has indicated that hemp and companies producing hemp-related or derived products will be eligible. So there is some relief to part of the industry, but unfortunately not the entire. And that kind of dovetails into point number 3, which is cash remains king or queen or whatever royal figure you'd like to use. But you really, at this time, you've got to really figure out what you have for cash reserves. If you have future expansion projects that can be put on hold during times when economic uncertainty could make a big difference down the line in terms of conserving cash during this initial period. What we will tell folks in any industry is that if you have cash, if you have a line of credit of any sort, and you can draw down upon it in order to ensure you have ample or available liquidity in dire straits, now may be the time to do it. Certainly on the flip side, to any potential lenders who are on the phone or anyone who may be thinking about lending, now may be the time to really drill down on what the real economic viability is of any of your borrowers. And if you have the ability to stop funding for some reason, for a valid, reasonable reason, let me say, you should definitely consider it. Unfortunately, there's other opportunities. The company might be able to initiate a capital call in order to bring in more cash. There may be other vulture funds or distressed debt funds out there. But cash will always remain king, and you need to understand what you have and develop ways to preserve it going forward. And then Yep.
One point on the lines, like a lot of companies do not have working capital lines, obviously. Everyone's mostly been self-funded, but to the extent you do, as Scott said, you should think about, drawing down. And Scott and I do a lot of finance work outside of cannabis and in cannabis. So we're representing lenders as well as borrowers. But one tip for borrowers, and lenders don't want to hear this, but if you do draw down, keeping that money in the same bank that you drew it down from is not necessarily a good thing because they have rights of offset. And if you do draw down and you're concerned about your employees, I would stick that money into your payroll account because payroll accounts can't be offset by lenders or creditors. So there's also that kind of planning that goes into this as well.
And so that kind of dovetails into point number 4, which is cannabis meets the workout world. And, there are a lot of workout professionals, and I'm not just talking about the lawyers, but there are a lot of workout professionals out there who have gone through several recessions and understand how restructuring, how debt restructuring or organizational restructuring can really assist the company. And so in these times, there are groups out there, and folks may be should think about, should they bring on a financial advisor to help deal with to create realistic cash flow projections, figure out where cuts can be made logically, and what would make sense for the long-term viability. There's a lot of, unfortunately, other types of workout situations. Most of them involve sort of the final end, whether it's a state court receivership or some type of out-of-court workout. But hopefully, as folks progress down this road, fewer and fewer will actually need to go to those sort of end result drastic conditions. Although, in some instances, a receivership might make sense for both the company and its creditors, or, entering some series of forbearances or trying to work out additional terms with your vendors. So there's traditional workout type norms that we utilize, us workout professionals utilize, and the cannabis industry really should think about and try to find those types of professionals who can easily help them survive and potentially, hopefully, thrive during this recessionary time. And that kind of dovetails to point number 5, and presumably there will be rise of strategic opportunities for those entities that have been able to conserve or preserve cash. Unfortunately, there'll be a lot of groups, businesses out there who are going to want to need to sell some of their assets for survival, whether it's leases, whether it's actual licenses, or the entire business. And unfortunately, for the sellers in these situations, they're going to get distressed prices. But that's why these are strategic opportunities for the potential purchasers out there. Also, there's distressed funds being formed. There's vulture capital funds being formed. And these would, in traditional workout world, they'll provide some sort of capital and or vehicle to purchase or to take advantage of these distressed opportunities. I know that we are running over time, but those are just 5 quick things I think people should think about during this time period. And hopefully down the line, we'll never have to talk about this again. But unfortunately, I think this might be a topic that we'll have to consider on and off for the next few months. And so your teams at Vicente Sederberg and Burns and Levinson are here to assist. We do work together, and it's not just regulatory, but your corporate needs, your financing needs, and your workout and distress needs. So with that, I will turn this over to Josh so that people can actually see a live person.
Thanks, Scott. Thanks, Frank.
I just want to
Very insightful. And yeah, jump in, Frank.
Just 1 second here.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, Frank, please go.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure we didn't miss a couple obvious but very important things on the workout and dealing with your business. And a lot of these may not apply, but dealing with your landlords, everyone is dealing with their landlords. And most landlords are being flexible, allowing you to defer a month or two, add on to the lease, renegotiate. So strongly encourage you to do that, and that's across all industries that's happening. It's going to be very difficult for somebody to evict somebody in this environment and not look like a pariah. But also take a look at your, because you said you have them, if you've got cultivation or even retail. It may be very unlikely, it probably is, but we're always encouraging our clients to look at their insurance and look at the business interruption provisions. A lot of them actually have exclusions. I don't want anyone to get overly excited about this, but you still should check the box and take a look at that and see if you might have some coverage. I just wanted to throw those last 2 points up there. Thank you.
Thanks, Frank. All right. Well, thank you all the presenters and thanks audience for working through this with us and a couple technical difficulties. To sort of answer a couple questions. First we have one by Christian Hagaseth. Great to see your name and glad to have you on the chat. And the question is, any expectation of needing to test marijuana for viral contamination, remediation, decontamination recommendations, how to track everyone who touched weed in case someone in the supply chain tested positive? This is an interesting question. It's like right now, it's like the FDA has said that there's no evidence of transmission through food or food packaging. But and that the bigger risk is to coworkers, not downstream contamination. With that said, though, it's like the MED does have rules that allows them to reserve the right upon good cause and reasonable grounds to hold and test batches that are risk to the public health. So, I think, a big picture answer to your question is like, hopefully it's not an issue, but with that said, it could be, and there's generally enough regulatory flexibility for the regulators, to step in and hold or destroy products that they think are unsafe. Moving on, there was some, questions about Massachusetts. Brandon, I don't know if you want to jump back on here.
Hey.
And there's a question about, House Bill 4580, Rep. Tyler's amendment, whether they'll be successful, and, also any thoughts you have on, I guess like the slowdown of licensing.
So I think that, I saw the question and I was chatting with my colleague Dan Smith about that bill, and he works with VS Strategies and does a lot of the policy work and used to be at the State House. But basically the bill was that particular amendment was withdrawn, so that's not going to be that's not going to be a part of this bill if it passes. Dan's thoughts were that there is a likelihood that the bill would pass, but it still needs the Senate or the House leaders have not really been convinced of the necessity of the bill yet. So if until that happens, he seems to think it's unlikely that bill will actually pass. The overall bill is a COVID relief bill for those who were wondering. I think that there will be some slowdowns in licensing, just to the extent that any inspections that were already scheduled and were delayed because the commission is trying to figure out the safest way for their investigators to do these inspections. So when they get back up, there's going to be a backlog, and that's going to cause delays until they can catch up to things. And we'll see if they're based on the safety measures that they take, it's just going to be a slower process. I'm curious to see what the agenda is going to look like for the April 9th meeting, and how many provisionals and finals the commission votes on and renewals as well. So I think April 9th meeting, and we see that agenda a couple of days before, 3 days before, we'll have a better sense of, what the, whether there's going to be overall delays in the application process.
Thanks, Brandon. There's another question about, the CARES Act, and, the question was, if there's a bank that would administer, the CARES Act, a payment protection loan, to a cannabis business, is there a chance that it could be forgiven? And, to take a step back, I think, the general rule from the SBA is they don't lend to illegal businesses. We'll see how the CARES Act, the Paycheck Protection Program falls in terms of the general SBA rules. Unlike the disaster relief, which the SBA said is not applicable to cannabis businesses, the disaster relief is administered directly from the SBA, whereas the payment protection is delivered through Chapter 7 lenders. And there's also, talk that, the payment protection programs will be delivered through non-SBA lenders as well. So there might be some hope for cannabis businesses, but I wouldn't cross your fingers. I think we'll know more as the Treasury makes regulations around it. And we're about up at time. I think the last question I'd like to land on, and Cassie or Charlie, if you want to jump in, is do you think that the COVID-19 is going to increase federal legalization or accelerate cannabis reform?
Yeah, I'll take a cut at answering that with the obvious caveat that it's very difficult to predict these things because, so it's like asking who's going to win the presidential election this year. Well, I think in the short term, we've seen a delay in some legalization efforts, either because it's just not possible to gather ballot signatures right now safely, or because states have been distracted from the legalization process because of the need to work on the circuit of COVID responses. So, for example, if you look at New York State, there's some hope this year that we could see legalization. I think there's still some hope, but one of the challenges is that it's difficult to resolve the differences between the two camps that we're focusing on the legalization with the coronavirus adding sort of an additional factor. So I think in the short term, we'll see a delay. I think in the long term, to me, what's very heartening is the fact that, as Josh pointed out, a business that was completely illegal in the United States up until fairly recently has now been deemed an essential business by many state and local governments. So I think it highlights almost the universal popularity of medical marijuana in the United States. And I think you'll see further progress on that front. So I am hopeful that in the medium to long term, it does speed up legalization.
Fantastic. Thanks, Charlie. Well, we're a couple minutes over, so I want to thank all of our participants, Burns and Levinson, and everyone who joined us. Please stay tuned. There'll be additional webinars. We are all available working out of our home offices, to help you navigate both the CARES Act and federal stimulus and each state and city regulation and workouts with your landlords and any other issues that you're facing right now. Don't hesitate to give us a call. For those who have sent questions that we haven't got to, we'll try and respond to you guys individually. So again, thank you. Thank you everyone. Stay safe, wash your hands, and stay tuned for another webinar.